She was like the cool older sister that I always wanted to be. She was just everything to me. Yeah.
This was probably one of the most brutal crime scenes that I've attended in my 32 years of law enforcement.
Most of these type of crimes involve crimes of passion, the people that the victim is close with. So you look at relationships. When he started dating her, things started turning for the worse.
She wanted that picture-perfect family.
That was the fuel of her desire.
I wanted her out of the picture. These were two people that could have had a good life, but I think in their minds, they just thought, we can do whatever we want. We can, do this and get away with it. It's something I'm still processing, and probably something I'll still process for the rest of my life.
October 2nd, 2020. At 9 a.m., 911 dispatchers in Carrollton, Texas are flooded with calls about an active shooter outside a property management office.
I need an ambulance immediately. Someone came up and just shot my assistant manager. I need someone here immediately.
They didn't know what was happening. I can only imagine the fear that they were experiencing at that time.
I'm doing this interview in silhouette for my privacy and my workplace where I'm at. In the morning, I come in, 9 o'clock. Me and my leasing agent were just working. My coworker, Alyssa, was supposed to be here. Where is she at? I did notice a vehicle that was speeding. And I'm talking speeding really, really fast towards the front office. I'm thinking it was an upset resident, maybe. But what didn't seem normal is he parked his car, opened up the door, then all we see is everything covered from his face to his mask to his gloves, everything all black. And that's when we actually see that he pulled up the gun. Me and my leasing agent looked at each other. I'm thinking it was just like a resident coming in to shoot us in the office. All I remember was like, hey, we're gonna die in this office. So I ran as fast as I can, grabbed the phone, told the police officers that there was somebody here with a gun. Then I was trying to figure out where to hide. And that's when we actually hear a gunshot going off.
I'm gonna get somebody that way. I need you to tell me some more information. Where is the shooter?
I don't have enough information. He's gone. He left in his car.
Okay, how long ago did he leave?
He literally left a second ago.
When she's sure the gunman is gone, Marie races outside to aid the victim.
I looked at her and I was like, this is Alyssa.
We learned pretty quickly that the victim was Alyssa Burkett.
She got stabbed more than probably 30 times. There was blood everywhere. She looked at me. I was like, what can I do? She looked at me. I go, come on. I go, you can make it. You can make it. She's spitting out more blood and everything. I go, please don't. I go, they will be here any minute. They'll be here to save you. She just looked at me. She's like, don't worry. I guess she was just telling me that she wasn't there alone. So she took her last breath and she passed. I grabbed my black sweater and covered her body. I didn't want anybody to have that image on the way she looked.
As law enforcement begins arriving on the scene, Alyssa's co-workers notify her family of the incident.
I got a call, actually from my dad, that Alyssa had been shot and she was dead. I was just in a state of shock, I think, that I realized, Alyssa is gone. She's never gonna be here again. You don't have that big sister in your life anymore that you look up to, you get advice to, everything, that she was gone.
Originally from Dallas, Alyssa Burkett was raised with 5 siblings in a loving home.
Alyssa was like the cool older sister that I always wanted to be. Like, she was always like goofing around, messing with me.
We lived in a different city, so she visited us and it was vacation for her and for us. She just lit up the room when she came in. She had so many friends as she grew older. She's trying to find herself, and she was interested in fashion and in modeling.
I always thought Alyssa was beautiful. She had like such good style. She would always have like really cool clothes that I would go and steal in her closet. I always saw her as like a role model for me. I looked up to her. She always told me to do good in the world, be a good person, like, because she was always helping others, doing what she could for others, even though she didn't have much.
After high school, Alyssa worked on her associate's degree and found steady employment.
She worked as a waitress for a while, but she really wanted to develop a career, and so she went into property management. In the fall of 2018, Alyssa came to us and said that she had met a man named Andrew at a bar, and there seemed to be an attraction there. So it seemed like their relationship went into high gear pretty quickly.
Alyssa's partner, Andrew Beard, grew up in a wealthy West Coast family.
He was from Northern California. I knew he was in a professional job and worked in management. And I also knew that he had an airplane and had property. He was older than Alyssa. He was in his 30s. And it appeared that he had a great life going on.
Alyssa actually texted me that she was pregnant. I was just like, wow. Like, I didn't expect it. I said, well, what are you gonna do? And she said, I don't know, but I'm gonna figure it out.
Andrew was happy when he found out on Alyssa's birthday, December 31st of 2018, he bought her a house. And it was on Lake Ray Hubbard in Rowlett. And that's a very small town atmosphere that is east of the Dallas area. Nice house, view of the lake, and that's where they were going to raise their daughter together.
Me and my grandmother went there, and we were there, and Andrew gave us the tour, and he showed us all the amenities the house had, and the nice backyard and balcony, and all the things that Andrew wanted to do to the house.
Alyssa was excited about motherhood, but as the months rolled by, the young mother-to-be began to have second thoughts about her future with Andrew.
They got together so quickly, and then they started having problems in their relationship.
She expressed to me like she wasn't in love with Andrew anymore.
By the time Alyssa's daughter Willow was born in 2019, she and Andrew had broken up.
And Alyssa had to leave and get her own place.
Despite her busy schedule, Alyssa began dating again. In time, she met a new man named Ben.
I met him, and we kind of all hung out with a boyfriend of mine, like the four of us.
She also decided that she wanted to be a lawyer.
She would have been a very successful lawyer from the way that I see that she was as a friend, as a co-worker, as a mom. Unfortunately, this happened.
On October 2nd, 2020, the 24-year-old has been murdered outside her workplace.
This victim was shot in the face and stabbed multiple times.
This was probably one of the most brutal crime scenes that I've attended in my 32 years of law enforcement. When I arrived, I could smell the blood.
While officers issue an alert across the metropolitan area, homicide detectives begin speaking to witnesses.
The manager of the apartment complex saw that the victim had parked right in front of the office and the suspect had parked right next to the victim's vehicle. She saw the initial part of it. We were able to determine that the suspect vehicle, was probably a dark-colored SUV.
But I wasn't able to picture the license plate because he had it covered.
Some accounts said the suspect was a black male. Other accounts said the suspect was wearing a face covering or wore a disguise.
One of the witnesses stated that a male, approximately 6 foot, 170 pounds, wearing all dark clothing, with a beard had fled the scene. There were several accounts, but from the majority, we were able to ascertain that there was a black vehicle that had left the scene.
The third witness was across the street, and they saw the whole thing. He said he heard what sounded like tires exploding. And he looked up, he saw Alyssa was shot through the window with a .410 shotgun. She was alive after the first shot. She exited the car and tried to make it to safety inside the office. And the suspect caught up to the victim. He grabbed her and turned her around and was stabbing her back toward her body like this. There's a lot of violence. So that signals that this thing was personal.
We were looking for somebody that knew Alyssa. Whoever did this wanted Alyssa dead.
While processing Alyssa's vehicle, detectives discover an ominous clue under the car.
We found a tracking device on her vehicle. That was really another part of the puzzle of the investigation. Our unit worked a lot of stalking cases, and vehicle trackers was becoming more and more common. A lot of times, there's a family member or somebody close to the victim, especially when there's this much passion involved in it. So you look at relationships.
Coming up, authorities revisit an alarming police report that sheds light on a possible suspect.
I go, you have to start watching your back. If he's capable of doing this to you, what more is he capable to do to you?
She was so stressed all the time. Her hair was falling out. She was looking around every corner.
And a twisted romance leads to a bitter and deadly dispute.
They put together a campaign of terror against her, and she felt it. Alyssa felt that.
In Carrollton, Texas, authorities are on the hunt for a masked gunman after Alyssa Burkett was murdered in broad daylight outside her office. And detectives have just discovered an ominous clue.
We found a GPS tracker that had been placed underneath her vehicle.
Most of these type of crimes involve crimes of passion, the people that the victim is close with, and we certainly had to explore that possibility.
Alyssa's co-workers tell detectives that she'd recently begun dating a man named Ben, but they don't know much about him or the couple's current status.
We had descriptions of the suspect vehicle being a dark pickup or a dark SUV. We learned Alyssa's boyfriend, he had a dark pickup truck.
Detectives contact Ben, who immediately agrees to meet with them.
He was scared, and he said he was not involved in this. He said he was at work. So one of the first things that we want to do is to check his alibi.
He ran a business out of his home, and we were able to establish that he was actually at home during the time of the murder through video surveillance at his home. He was quickly ruled out as a suspect.
I wasn't necessarily ready for it. So much pain to be able to feel that the sadness that he was feeling, for sure.
That's when Alyssa's boyfriend tells detectives about a recent incident at her place of work that he believes could be traced back to her ex, Andrew Beard.
About a month prior to this crime, we received a drug tip from an anonymous caller stating that Alyssa was dealing drugs out of the back of her vehicle right in front of the office.
This person claimed to live in the apartments, said that he was watching her deal drugs, and so the Carrollton police came out and investigated.
She was very cooperative. She gave consent to search the trunk of her car. Inside, they found a box that contained a pistol, some marijuana, I believe a little bit of cocaine, and some money that was planted there. The caller was very specific as to what was in the car, so it seemed kind of suspicious that this caller knew so much detail.
Alyssa had adamantly denied the drugs were hers.
If anybody knows how drug dealing goes, it's not a neat little box in the trunk. And Alyssa didn't have any kind of reputation for any of this stuff. So what she said made sense to him. So he made a report on that incident, but didn't arrest Alyssa because there was obviously not something right going on here.
After a police officer left the office, I took my opportunity to ask her if everything was okay, and then she just started crying. She goes, "Do you remember that? The one I was telling you?" I go, "Yes, your psycho ex." "Yes, I do." She goes, "Well, guess what he did?" I was like, "What?" She goes, "He made an anonymous call and said that I was selling drugs." I'm like, "Are you sure?" She goes, "Yes, I'm 100% it was him." I go, "Well, all I can tell you is like now, moving forward, you have to start watching your back. If he's capable of doing this to you, what more is he capable to do to you?"
Alyssa's boyfriend alleges that following Andrew and Alyssa's breakup, Andrew refused to let go.
When she was 7 or 8 months pregnant, he kicked her out of the house, put all her things on the curb, and got very upset, from what I understand, because she brought a friend over with a small child and they were making too much noise.
But then she said every place she went, he would turn up.
She did mention that Andrew was very controlling towards her. Like, if she wanted to go out with friends, he wanted to know where she was going, who she was with, and if he didn't like those people, he did not want her going.
She was so stressed all the time. Her hair was falling out. She was looking around every corner. Andrew knew she had a new boyfriend. He didn't want them being the caregivers for his child. And so Andrew became more and more aggressive with what he was doing and put a tracker on the baby, the car seat. She talked to her lawyer about a restraining order. There just wasn't enough evidence there to do it.
During my interview with Alyssa's boyfriend, he had expressed some concern that he was being stalked, that he was being tracked somehow, which was confirmed when we checked underneath his vehicle and found a similar tracker that was found under Alyssa's.
I was notified that Alyssa's mother was at the scene. She was upset, as one could only imagine. She told us the victim had been going through a child custody battle with the father of her child.
He did not want to pay child support, and he made that very clear.
Alyssa's mother believes Andrew planted drugs in her daughter's car to bolster his child custody case.
We learned that Andrew actually had his custody days, and he was in the possession of Willow at the time.
According to Alyssa's mom, Alyssa and Andrew had recently been in court regarding the child custody agreement, and it had gone in Alyssa's favor.
Andrew wanted full custody, and they decided on shared custody. The judge was siding with her. We were happy, but she was even more worried. Alyssa was saying, "Andrew's gonna murder me."
At that point, we quickly zeroed in on Andrew Beard as being the prime suspect.
Just hours into the murder investigation of Alyssa Burkett, detectives believe Alyssa's ex-boyfriend, Andrew Beard, has killed her over custody of their 15-month-old daughter. By mid-morning that day, authorities send a surveillance team to Andrew's home 30 miles away in Rolette.
We don't have a search warrant, but we can secure the house and make sure that any evidence isn't destroyed.
Officers start watching the house and see Andrew with a woman and Willow entering the truck. They looked like they were loading some bags, and it appeared as though they were leaving the home.
As the truck pulls away, authorities spot an opportunity.
In Texas, vehicles must have 2 license plates on the vehicle, one in the rear and then one in the front. Andrew Beard did not have that front license plate, which gave us probable cause to make a traffic stop on the vehicle. They were stopped in a white Ford F-150, but the suspect vehicle that we were looking for was a black SUV.
Andrew Beard, as far as we knew, didn't own any vehicles that matched the suspect vehicle.
He was identified as well as his fiancee, who was in the vehicle with him, and that was Holly Elkins.
They seemed nonchalant, like, why are you stopping us?
Detectives don't reveal anything about the murder and instead tell Andrew that they're investigating his child custody case with Alyssa Burkett.
And Andrew said, she's always trying to strum up things about me. So I'm sure it's something untruthful that she sent you over here for. So they were nonchalant and acting like nothing had occurred.
The whole interaction was really low-key. We didn't want to alert him to the fact that we were onto him, but told them that we wanted to talk to them at the station, which is the reason they agreed to come to the police department.
We secured the pickup truck. We told them that we weren't going to allow them to go back into the residence at that point in time. So they called an Uber. They were going to meet us at the police department for questioning.
While waiting for a warrant to search the house, investigators canvassed the neighborhood in order to learn more about Andrew Beard.
We ended up meeting the neighbors next to his house. They said, this guy's a great guy.
He did seem to be a really good dad. I mean, he literally carried the what do you call it, that hammock? He would put it in front and carry the baby around with him, and you don't normally see men do this. He did seem to really take care of her.
Neighbors say that after Andrew and Alyssa broke up, he was determined to move on.
He had a lot of women coming through his home. It was a revolving door.
Andrew and Holly met late March, early April, and within 6 months, they were engaged. He was head over heels for Holly.
Holly looked like a tall Barbie doll. She wore a lot of makeup. She dressed to perfection.
Born in 1990, Holly Elkins grew up outside Detroit, Michigan. After college, Holly built a prosperous career in Texas.
Holly was 21 when we met, and she was already doing pretty high-end sales for different technology companies at that age. She was very outgoing, very social, got along with everybody, kind of life of the party kind of girl, and she was always a good time.
To look at Holly, you would think that she was the little, sweet, innocent girl, but Holly seemed very bossy, and when she talked to Andrew, you knew who wore the pants.
Andrew and Holly fell hard for one another. Holly was especially taken with Andrew's young daughter.
It seemed like she cared about that child so much.
She was always ready to get married, settle down, start having babies. She was a very family-oriented woman.
When detectives returned to the station to question Holly and Andrew, they realized the couple never showed up.
Their lawyer apparently told them that we would make an appointment later because the lawyer wasn't available at that point in time. We were working on search warrants on the vehicle, on phones, and on the residence. Obviously, our first thing is the residence. We want to get in there.
At 7:30 p.m. that night, a judge signs off on the search warrants.
We're in the house. We find trackers identical to the trackers that we found on Alyssa's vehicle and on Alyssa's boyfriend's vehicle. We also found, which was very interesting, a script for that drug complaint that was called in a month before, alleging that Alyssa was dealing drugs in front of the apartment complex.
It had Alyssa's license plate. It had make and color of her car. It had the Carrollton Police Department beat phone number.
We also found a .22 revolver pistol with what seemed to be a homemade silencer attached to it in the garage.
During the search of the house, we were able to locate several firearms and knives that were in the residence. Unfortunately, none of them appeared to be the murder weapon from what shot Alyssa or what was used to stab her.
So we get a search warrant for Andrew Beard's vehicle, and in the pickup truck was a diaper bag for the baby. And inside the diaper bag was some burned items. It looked like makeup wipes that had dark colored makeup on it. They had a makeup brush that the bristles had burned, but the handle was still intact. They also had jars of dark complected makeup that was in the bag as well. The description of the suspect, some people described this suspect as a black male. So we started thinking that he had actually disguised himself as a black male to complete this offense. We had an affirmative link to Andrew in this case.
Coming up, authorities continue building their case against their primary suspect and discover a plot born of obsession.
She wanted that picture-perfect family.
He was going to make doubly sure that he wasn't a failure.
Texas authorities have uncovered a trove of evidence that Andrew Beard murdered his ex-girlfriend, Alyssa Burkett, over custody of their daughter. As detectives continue canvassing Andrew's neighborhood, they hit pay dirt.
On the other side, in front of his house, was another neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, we found a dark SUV. It had plastic taped up around the back windows, like black plastic bags that were taped up to block the windows. The passenger seat was all the way down, so it was set up as a surveillance vehicle. Now we just have to tie that car to Andrew Beard. We found out where it was purchased based upon the registered owner of the vehicle. We contacted that registered owner, and that registered owner said that, yeah, Andrew Beard came by, paid cash for this car, and left with it.
The vehicle is impounded and immediately processed for evidence.
We could see what appeared to be a blood smear on the steering wheel, and there looked like there was a face covering or a fake beard that was on the corner of the seat.
At this point in the investigation, we believe that Andrew Beard used makeup and a fake beard to make him look like an African-American man.
So we now have probable cause to arrest him for this offense.
On October 5th, 3 days after the murder, police arrest Andrew outside his home.
There was no reaction from him. There was no look of surprise when he was arrested.
I would never dream in a million years that Andrew Beard would be capable of such a thing. I was like, are you serious? It was crazy.
When he was caught, it was a relief. Justice will come to him.
He quickly let the officers know that he wanted to speak with an attorney. So from that point on, I was speaking with Andrew Beard's attorneys.
When police question Andrew's fiancée, Holly Elkins, she insists they have arrested the wrong man.
We ended up talking to her. She was free to leave, but she still kept talking. Holly claimed that they were home all along together when the murder took place.
In late October, Andrew was released on a $1 million bond.
He got out of jail on an attorney's bond.
That concerned us because of the brutal nature of this crime. We were concerned not only for Willow, we were also concerned about Alyssa's family.
We got the word that he was out. We were in shock. We were dismayed. And to be honest, a lot of our family members at that point were arming themselves.
And now Alyssa's mother has the baby, so now they have a murderer that's free from custody. She's worried about her own safety. So that's when we filed the case on the gun, the .22 with the silencer that we had found in the garage. The silencer appeared to be homemade, didn't have a serial number. That is a federal offense. So we put him back in jail on that gun charge.
I'll, never forget how the judge looked at him and said, "Mr. Beard, I'm denying your bail." And so there was a collective sigh of relief from our family.
When authorities receive the findings from the crime lab, the case against Andrew is solidified.
The blood found on the steering wheel matched Alyssa. We found the fake beard that Andrew used during the offense had his DNA. So the vehicle was the nail in the case.
Well, there were several hearings in the 2+ years that he was awaiting his trial. Right before the trial happened, we got a call saying, "You need to be in court today. There's a special hearing." We found out that he was pleading guilty. And so it was a bit of a surprise. We thought he would fight it the whole way.
On June 22, 2022, Andrew pleads guilty to 2 violent federal crimes, including cyberstalking resulting in death.
It was a good thing because he admitted his guilt.
I thought Andrew was a narcissist. I truly did. And I did think he was a psychopath.
One of the conditions of the plea is that he gives a proffer, which is basically just, I'm going to tell you everything that happened.
Following the hearing, Andrew sits down with federal investigators and opens up for the first time about the crime's true mastermind.
It was apparent that he was ready to tell Holly's involvement. He quickly pointed the finger at her.
In June of 2022, Andrew Beard has implicated his fiancée, Holly Elkins, in the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Alyssa Burkett.
Beard told us that things were going pretty good with him and Alyssa. As custody situations go, they were getting along. But when he started dating Holly, things started turning for the worst.
She wanted to be the mother of Willow. She wanted that picture-perfect family.
So Holly, according to Andrew, had it in her mind that Alyssa didn't need to be in the picture anymore. According to Andrew, they needed to up the ante, be more aggressive in the custody battle. So they started trying to prove that Alyssa was unfit.
They put together a campaign of terror against her, and she felt it. Alyssa felt that.
But first it started out just trying to find dirt. And then it escalated into, well, we need to put trackers on Ben's car, put trackers on Alyssa's car. Those kind of things that we had to do for the custody battle. And then it developed into, she needs to be murdered. It was very shocking as he went on and described how important or how fixated Holly had become on him murdering Alyssa.
He had been to the apartment complex a number of times over the previous several months to surveil Alyssa as she arrived. Andrew told us that on those practice runs, his purpose was to kill her. And he told us that he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And that every time he told Holly that he couldn't do it, Holly would berate him and make him feel smaller and less of a man.
Andrew told us Holly kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And it became important to him to please Holly. And so he made up his mind that he wasn't going to go back to Holly again and say, look, I couldn't do it. I think that's why it was so violent, because he was going to make doubly sure that he wasn't a failure for Holly.
Andrew tells authorities he realized he needed to come clean when he found out Holly had moved to Miami and gotten married 1 year after his arrest.
So a lot of time had passed, and Andrew was in prison. Holly had moved on with her life. Andrew, he was up against a wall, and in order to save himself, he was going to do what it took to make himself look a little better. I didn't see a lot of remorse during the interview with Andrew. It seemed to me like he needed to get his facts out to us.
Following Andrew's interview, detectives secure a search warrant for Holly's phone records and confirm she had been putting pressure on Andrew in the months before the murder.
Several of those text messages were very aggressive, from Holly to Andrew, about how he's weak, about how he lets his baby mama run over him.
They were written in a sense that Holly was pushing him toward the end goal, which was to get rid of Alyssa.
Detectives also use Holly's phone records to track her movements in the days leading up to the murder.
We were able to uncover several specific instances where things that were bought for the commission of the murder.
On September 10th, Holly and Andrew purchased at a sporting goods store the clothing that Andrew wore during the commission of the murder. Within days of that, Holly purchased some dark-colored makeup at another store, and within days of that, Holly and Andrew purchased the ammunition and the Camillus knife that was used during the murder.
On May 24th, 2023, a federal judge sentences Andrew Beard to 43 years in prison. 1 month later, authorities issue an arrest warrant for Holly Elkins and discover the 32-year-old is currently at the Miami airport, getting ready to leave the country.
Holly had been indicted by the Assistant U.S. Attorney's Office, and she was traveling to the Dominican Republic. Holly thought that she had probably gotten away with this. She was living her life like she was gonna just not have to answer for what she did.
In July of 2023, almost 3 years after Alyssa Burkett's murder, authorities race to a Miami airport, hoping to catch Holly Elkins before she boards a flight out of the country. Fortunately, federal authorities catch up with Holly before takeoff.
I got a call from the DOJ saying Holly Elkins is under arrest. She's at the Miami airport right now, and we've just arrested her for the same charges we had on Andrew Beard. They had a bond hearing for her, and she was held. They would not release her, which I was glad that they held her.
In April 2024, Holly's case goes to trial.
I saw Holly in court. She had no tears on her face. Nothing, like no regrets on her at all. Just really cold on her expression.
The government's star witness is an FBI agent specializing in digital evidence. She details the phone records and purchases that link Holly to the crime.
The prosecution showed quite a bit of evidence that they had in text messages between Andrew and Holly. And that really opened my eyes of this was a whole deeper level.
And it was obvious she wanted Alyssa's baby. That was the fuel of her desire. And what motivated her, she wanted her baby. Holly would refer to the baby as my Willow, my baby, within a couple of weeks of meeting Andrew, she was doing this. She reached out to Alyssa one day and said, hey, let's be friends. In the meantime, she was behind the scenes saying things like she just absolutely hated her guts.
Prosecutors say Holly's obsession fueled the custody fight that ensued, and she repeatedly goaded Andrew to act.
She wanted her out of the picture so that her and Andrew could start their family. There is a very disturbing video that they showed in court of Holly videotaping Willow. At the time, her mother is being murdered and asking, "Willow, what's going on today?" Holly knows that her mother is being murdered, and she's asking this question to this baby. It was very disturbing.
I think it all comes back to the entitlement of both of them. Andrew grew up with money. He wasn't poor. Neither was Holly. They grew up with that entitlement. They grew up as the world revolves around me, and we can get away with anything that we do.
On April 17th, 2024, jurors retire to deliberate Holly's fate. It takes them under 2 hours to deliver a guilty verdict.
She didn't show any emotion when the guilty verdict was read, and they took her out. But it didn't surprise me. She never has had any emotion from the start of this.
It was bittersweet. When you're in such profound grief, it's not like you think of retribution at that point, but it was the right thing to happen.
We came to know Alyssa's whole family, and we all wanted to get it right for them. And it was important to us because we were their voice.
We actually finally have justice for Alyssa, so now I can see that she's in peace.
This memory of her, it just hits you in a wave, and you feel the pain. Like, it's a pain that never goes away, and that I carry around to this day.
Alyssa not being there, it's almost like the sun was just blocked out, because that's really what she represented to all of us, is just a bright light in the family.
On a cold December night in Northern California, two teenagers drove down a lonely gravel road, searching for nothing more sinister than a quiet place to be alone. There were no flashing lights in the distance, no warning signs, no whispers that history was about to bend into something darker. The air was still, the lake reflected the moon like polished glass, and the only sounds drifting across the empty landscape were the faint rustle of winter wind through the trees. It should have been a forgettable evening. Instead, it became the opening chapter of one of the most terrifying mysteries America has ever known. Long before newspapers would print a strange symbol on their front pages, before detectives would pin cryptic letters across evidence boards, before millions of people would become obsessed with trying to uncover the face behind a name that seemed almost mythical, there were simply two victims, a deserted lover's lane, and a killer who vanished into the darkness without leaving behind the answers investigators desperately needed. California in the late 1960s was a place defined by contradiction. Cities exploded with music, protest, and dreams of freedom. Young people believed they were building a different future, one brighter than the generations before them. San Francisco pulsed with the energy of the summer of love. College campuses buzzed with revolution. New highways stitched together growing suburbs, carrying families toward opportunity and prosperity. Yet beneath that optimism, fear had begun to spread in quieter ways. Crime rates were climbing. Public trust was weakening. Newspapers increasingly carried stories of random violence that seemed impossible to predict. Even so, nobody was prepared for what was about to unfold. On the night of December 20th, 1968, 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen parked near Lake Herman Road, a remote stretch connecting Vallejo and Benicia. It was a familiar destination for young couples seeking privacy. The road itself was isolated, bordered by open fields and darkness that swallowed everything beyond the reach of headlights. Friends later recalled the teenagers as ordinary, hopeful, and deeply likable. David was responsible, interested in science, and known for his quiet confidence. Betty Lou loved music and had a contagious smile that people remembered long after she was gone. They had plans beyond that night. Christmas was only days away. Their families expected them home. Instead, sometime after 10 o'clock, another vehicle entered that lonely stretch of road. No one knows exactly how the encounter began. Investigators later reconstructed several possibilities. Perhaps the stranger parked nearby and waited. Perhaps he drove past once, studying the couple before turning around. Maybe he approached as though asking for directions, creating a brief illusion of normalcy before violence shattered the silence. Every theory begins the same way, with an unknown driver appearing out of nowhere, and every theory ends with two teenagers lying in the cold December darkness. Evidence suggested the killer forced the couple out of their car. David Faraday was shot at extremely close range. The fatal wound behind his left ear indicated precision rather than panic. Betty Lou Jensen ran. She sprinted into the darkness, desperately trying to escape across the gravel turnout. She never made it far. Multiple bullets struck her from behind. Her body collapsed dozens of feet away from the car, frozen in the exact direction she had been trying to flee. The attack lasted only moments. Then the killer disappeared. No robbery. No apparent argument. No known connection between murderer and victims. Just violence without explanation. Sheriff's deputies arriving at the scene faced questions that would haunt investigators for decades. Why this couple? Why this location? Was the shooter someone they knew? Had another witness unknowingly driven past seconds before the attack? Tire tracks and shell casings hinted at movement, but they told no story complete enough to identify the person responsible. The crime scene itself seemed almost deliberately cruel in its simplicity. Without motive, detectives searched for patterns. They interviewed classmates, neighbors, family members, friends, former boyfriends, anyone who might have held a grudge. Nothing fit. The murders looked less like an emotional explosion and more like an execution carried out by someone entirely detached from the victims. At first, many investigators believed the crime would eventually resolve itself. Most murders did. Someone usually talked. Someone made a mistake. Someone recognized suspicious behavior after seeing newspaper coverage. Detectives expected a breakthrough within weeks. Weeks became months. Months became silence. The Lake Herman Road murder slowly drifted toward becoming another unsolved file stacked inside evidence rooms already crowded with unanswered tragedies. If events had stopped there, the names David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen might have remained known only within Solano County. Their deaths would have been remembered locally, mourned by families, revisited occasionally by retired detectives wondering what clue they had overlooked. But the killer had not finished. 6 months later, the illusion that the first murders were isolated shattered completely. The 4th of July weekend in 1969 filled Northern California with celebration. Fireworks distributed. Families gathered around barbecues. Roads carried countless travelers enjoying the holiday. Amid the festivities, another young couple sought privacy away from crowds. Darlene Farron, 22 years old, energetic and well-known among friends, drove to Blue Rock Springs Park with 19-year-old Michael Mageau shortly before midnight. They parked inside another secluded area popular with couples. The similarities were chilling. Night. Isolation. A parked vehicle. Young victims. An unknown car approaching. According to Michael's later account, another automobile pulled into the parking lot and stopped nearby. After a brief pause, it drove away. For a moment, everything seemed normal again. Then the vehicle returned. Its headlights flooded their car. A man stepped out. Michael initially assumed it was a police officer performing a routine check. The stranger carried what appeared to be a flashlight. Instead of requesting identification, the light suddenly revealed a handgun. Gunfire exploded through the darkness. Windows shattered. Glass rained across the seats. Bullets ripped through metal and flesh with terrifying speed. Michael screamed. Darlene was struck repeatedly. The shooter walked away. Then, astonishingly, he turned back. Hearing signs of life inside the vehicle, he calmly approached again and fired additional rounds into the wounded victims before leaving for good. The attack demonstrated something deeply disturbing. This was not rage. This was method. The killer wanted certainty. Miraculously, Michael survived despite devastating injuries. Darlene Farron did not. As ambulances raced through Vallejo streets, detectives immediately noticed echoes of the Lake Herman Road murders. The similarities could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. 2 attacks, 2 couples, 2 remote locations. An offender comfortable operating in darkness and disappearing before police could respond. Yet investigators still lacked the one thing they needed above all else: identity. Then something happened that transformed a local homicide investigation into national history. Just after midnight on July 5th, only about 40 minutes after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, a man placed a telephone call from a public payphone near downtown Vallejo. His voice was calm, measured, emotionless. "I want to report a double murder." The caller provided precise directions to the crime scene before adding words that stunned the dispatcher. He claimed responsibility not only for the shooting that had just occurred, but also for murders on Lake Herman Road months earlier. Then he hung up. Police rushed to locate the caller. The payphone stood only a short distance from the police department. Whoever had used it was already gone. No dramatic escape. No witnesses capable of offering useful descriptions. No fingerprints leading directly to a suspect. Only another ghostly encounter with someone who seemed to move through Northern California without leaving behind the evidence investigators desperately needed. The realization spread rapidly through law enforcement. The 2 cases were officially connected. Somewhere, a single individual had murdered at least 3 people, attempted to kill a 4th, and personally contacted police to ensure they understood exactly what he had done. The confidence displayed during that call deeply unsettled detectives. Most killers avoided attention. This one sought it. Most murderers feared investigators. This one appeared eager to challenge them. That psychological shift changed everything. No longer were detectives hunting someone trying to disappear forever. Now they were pursuing someone who wanted to be noticed, but only on his own terms. As investigators compared reports from both crime scenes, subtle consistencies emerged. The attacks occurred in relatively isolated areas familiar to local residents. The offender appeared comfortable driving at night. He demonstrated remarkable composure before, during, and after violence. Most strikingly, there was no confirmed relationship between the killer and any victim. Randomness became the weapon. Every young couple suddenly imagined headlights pulling in behind them. Every quiet parking area seemed dangerous. Parents warned teenagers against secluded roads that had once symbolized harmless romance. Police increased patrols near lovers' lanes, yet officers privately admitted an uncomfortable truth. They had no idea who they were looking for. No confirmed face. No confirmed name. No confirmed occupation. Nothing beyond fragments collected from terrified survivors and silent crime scenes. Then, as Northern California struggled to comprehend the possibility of a serial murderer operating within its communities, envelopes began arriving at newspaper offices. Inside were letters unlike anything editors had ever seen. Each page was written with unsettling confidence. Each claimed responsibility for the killings. Each demanded attention. And beneath the words appeared a strange circular symbol with cross lines at its center, a mark that would soon become one of the most infamous signatures in criminal history. The anonymous writer ended his message with a name the world had never heard before. The envelopes arrived without fanfare. There were no fingerprints pointing to a suspect, no dramatic confrontation, and no indication that the sender understood how profoundly those ordinary pieces of mail would alter the investigation. On July 31st, 1969, 3 nearly identical letters reached 3 major newspapers across Northern California. Each claimed responsibility for the recent shootings. Each contained a portion of a 408-character cipher. Each demanded publication on the front page, accompanied by a threat that more violence would follow if the newspapers refused. For investigators, the letters immediately presented a difficult question. Were they the work of the murderer, or were they an elaborate hoax designed to exploit a pair of highly publicized crimes? The author included details that had never been released publicly. Those details strongly suggested that whoever wrote the letters possessed first-hand knowledge of the attacks. Detectives from multiple jurisdictions quickly exchanged information, comparing crime scene reports against the contents of the messages. The correspondence appeared authentic enough to warrant serious attention. The newspapers faced a dilemma of their own. Publishing the letters risked rewarding someone who seemed intent on gaining public attention. Refusing to publish them carried the possibility, however uncertain, that the anonymous writer might attempt to carry out his threats. Editors consulted with law enforcement before deciding to print substantial portions of the messages. Their decision sparked intense public interest and transformed what had begun as a regional homicide investigation into a story followed across the United States. The cipher itself became an immediate source of fascination. Printed in neat rows of unfamiliar symbols, circles, triangles, and geometric shapes, it appeared less like ordinary writing than a carefully constructed puzzle. Cryptographers, military personnel, amateur code breakers, mathematicians, and curious readers all began trying to decipher its meaning. Newspapers received thousands of letters from people convinced they had discovered the solution. Most had not. While professionals examined statistical patterns and substitution methods, an unexpected breakthrough came from outside law enforcement. Donald and Betty Harden, a schoolteacher and his wife living in Salinas, approached the puzzle with patience rather than specialized equipment. Donald believed that if the author sought publicity, he would almost certainly begin by talking about himself. Betty agreed. Together, they tested common English phrases against recurring symbol patterns. Slowly, isolated words emerged. I. Kill. People. As additional substitutions fell into place, entire sentences began to reveal themselves. The message described the writer's claimed enjoyment of killing and referred to collecting victims as slaves for an afterlife. At the same time, the cipher failed to provide the one answer everyone wanted most. The author's identity remained concealed. Near the end of the decoded text, the writer claimed he would not reveal his name because doing so would interfere with his plans. Whether that statement represented genuine strategy, deliberate deception, or simple taunting remains a matter of debate. What mattered to investigators was that the cipher confirmed something deeply troubling. The letter writer and the killer were almost certainly the same person. Yet even after the code had been solved, detectives gained remarkably little that could be used in court. The message contained no address, no occupation, no meaningful biographical details, and no verifiable confession beyond information already linking the author to the crimes. It revealed personality more than identity. Behavioral specialists would later examine the correspondence extensively. Although criminal profiling was still in its infancy during the late 1960s, several observations emerged from the language itself. The author appeared to crave recognition. He displayed confidence in his ability to evade capture. He seemed to derive satisfaction from manipulating both investigators and the public. Most importantly, he understood the power of media attention. Every newspaper headline expanded his audience. Every published letter amplified his voice. That realization forced law enforcement into an uncomfortable balancing act. Investigators needed public assistance, yet every public statement also risked giving the anonymous writer exactly what he appeared to want. The investigation itself became increasingly complex because no single agency controlled every aspect of the case. The attacks had occurred in different jurisdictions. Local police departments, county sheriffs, state investigators, and federal authorities all possessed pieces of the larger picture. Detectives worked diligently to share reports, compare evidence, and coordinate interviews, but differences in procedures and communication inevitably created challenges. This fragmentation will become one of the defining characteristics of the Zodiac investigation. Physical evidence remained frustratingly limited. Ballistics experts compare recovered shell casings. Crime scene technicians examined tire impressions. Handwriting specialists analyzed every stroke of the letters. Fingerprint examiners searched for usable impressions. Laboratories tested every available clue using the forensic methods of the era. Some findings suggested possible connections between incidents. Others produced conflicting interpretations. None identified a suspect with sufficient certainty to justify an arrest. Meanwhile, public anxiety continued to grow. Parents warned teenagers to avoid isolated roads. Young couples reconsidered familiar meeting places. Local businesses reported customers discussing the case almost constantly. Schools addressed rumors spreading among students. Radio broadcasts carried frequent updates, while television news devoted increasing airtime to the mysterious correspondent whose symbol had become instantly recognizable. The symbol itself began appearing far beyond police files. People sketched it into notebooks. Readers clipped newspaper articles and pinned them to bulletin boards. Some called police to report neighbors they considered suspicious. Others became convinced the author was a coworker, a relative, or a stranger they had briefly encountered years earlier. Thousands of tips poured into investigators' offices. Most led nowhere. Each nevertheless demanded attention. Every interview consumed valuable time. Every promising lead eventually had to be verified or eliminated. Detectives often worked late into the night reviewing statements, comparing timelines, and attempting to separate meaningful information from speculation. Retired investigators would later describe one of the greatest difficulties of the case as the sheer volume of possibilities. The letters created an illusion that the killer was everywhere. In reality, the available evidence remained remarkably thin. As August 1969 progressed, the public expected another breakthrough. Surely, many believed, someone who communicated so openly with newspapers would eventually make a mistake. Perhaps a fingerprint. Perhaps recognizable handwriting. Perhaps a witness remembering an unusual vehicle. Perhaps an acquaintance noticing disturbing behavior after reading the published cipher. Yet no decisive mistake emerged. Instead, investigators found themselves confronting an adversary who appeared unusually disciplined. Whether by planning or by luck, the anonymous correspondent consistently remained just beyond their reach. The case was no longer defined solely by murder. It had become a contest of information, perception, and patience. Every new letter demanded careful authentication. Every statement required verification. Every claim had to be measured against known evidence. And behind every decision lingered the same unanswered question. Was the writer carefully controlling the investigation, or merely creating the illusion that he was? No detective could answer with confidence. But all agreed on one point. The correspondence marked the beginning of a new and dangerous phase. The unknown killer had discovered that he could influence public conversation without ever appearing in public himself. His words traveled farther than his bullets, shaping headlines, generating fear, and complicating an investigation already burdened by uncertainty. For the families of the victims, however, the attention changed nothing essential. They still waited for a knock on the door that never came. They still hoped the next phone call would bring news of an arrest. They still searched newspapers for answers that each new article promised, but never delivered. The mystery had grown larger than any single crime scene. And it was only beginning. The afternoon of September 27, 1969, began like countless others at Lake Berryessa. Families picnicked along the shoreline. Fishermen worked the coves, and college students enjoyed one of the last warm weekends before autumn settled over Northern California. Nothing about the setting suggested it would soon become one of the most recognizable crime scenes in American criminal history. Among the visitors that day were Brian Hartnell, a 20-year-old college student, and Cecilia Shepard, a 22-year-old student. They spread out a blanket on a quiet hillside overlooking the lake, away from the larger crowds. Friends later described the pair as thoughtful, intelligent, and enjoying a peaceful afternoon together. Shortly after 6 p.m., Cecilia noticed a man in the distance. At first, his behavior seemed unusual but not immediately threatening. He appeared to be watching them from behind nearby trees before gradually moving closer. Witness recollections indicate that the man eventually approached wearing an extraordinary outfit unlike anything reported in the previous attacks. He wore a dark executioner-style hood that completely concealed his face. Over the chest was a large white crosshair symbol inside a circle, the same emblem that had appeared beneath the letters sent to Bay Area newspapers. Sunglasses covered his eyes, and a bib-like garment extended over his shoulders. The disguise prevented Brian and Cecilia from identifying even basic facial characteristics. Unlike the earlier shootings, the attacker initiated a conversation. According to Brian Hartnell's later testimony, the man claimed he was an escaped convict who needed money and a vehicle to travel to Mexico. He carried what appeared to be a handgun, giving the victims little reason to doubt his story. Remaining calm, Brian cooperated, handing over his wallet and complied with instructions. The attacker produced pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline and ordered Cecilia to tie Brian's hands. After checking the knots, he tightened them himself before binding Cecilia in the same manner. Brian would later recall that the man spoke in a controlled, almost rehearsed manner, showing little outward emotion. Then the situation changed dramatically. Without warning, the attacker drew a large knife and began stabbing the bound victims. Brian was stabbed multiple times. Cecilia suffered even more severe wounds. Despite the brutality of the assault, the attacker did not linger. He walked back toward Brian's Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. Using a black felt-tip pen, he wrote directly on the driver's door. The message listed the dates of the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs attacks, followed by the current date and the words by knife. For investigators, that inscription proved enormously significant. It explicitly linked the Lake Berrios assault to the earlier crimes, reinforcing conclusion that a single offender was responsible. The attacker then left the area on foot. Remarkably, both victims were still alive. After considerable effort, Brian managed to free himself enough to seek help. Nearby visitors contacted emergency services, and first responders arrived to find a scene unlike any they had previously encountered in the investigation. The bindings, the handwritten message on the vehicle, and the unusual costume represented entirely new forms of evidence. Investigators carefully photographed the writing on the car door before preserving it for examination. They collected the length of clothesline, searched the surrounding terrain for footprints, and documented impressions left in the soil. Shoe print evidence would later indicate that the attacker wore military-style boots, though this information alone could not identify a suspect. Unlike the previous attacks, this crime scene also provided investigators with surviving eyewitness. Despite his injuries, Brian Hartnell gave detectives an account that became one of the most valuable sources of information in the case. He described the hood, the symbol, the attacker's measured voice, and the sequence of events leading up to the stabbing. Although he could not identify the man's face, his testimony offered insight into the offender's behavior that had not been available after the earlier shootings. Cecilia Shepard was also able to speak with investigators before her condition worsened. She provided additional details that helped corroborate Brian's account. Tragically, despite extensive medical treatment, she later died from her injuries. Only Brian survived. The attack raised important questions. Why had the offender abandoned firearms in favor of a knife? Why wear such an elaborate disguise? Why spend time speaking with the victims instead of attacking immediately? Behavioral experts have proposed various explanations over the years, but none can be confirmed. Some suggest the costume reflected an attempt to conceal identity while reinforcing the symbol already associated with the letters. Others believe the prolonged interaction indicates growing confidence on the part of the offender. These remain interpretations rather than established facts. Later that evening, another development connected the crime to the earlier investigation. A man telephoned the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a public payphone, calmly reporting the stabbing and directing authorities to the scene. The caller also claimed responsibility for the previous attacks. As in earlier incidents, the call was brief. By the time officers traced its origin, the caller had disappeared. The repeated use of public telephones complicated investigative efforts. Although technicians examined the locations for fingerprints and other evidence, the available forensic technology of 1969 offered limited opportunities to identify an unknown caller. The Lake Berryessa attack fundamentally changed the investigation. Until then, many aspects of the offender's appearance and methods remained speculative. Brian Hartnell's testimony confirmed that the attacker was willing to interact directly with victims, improvise a false story, and employ elaborate preparations before committing violence. Investigators also recognized another pattern. The offender appeared adaptable. He had used a firearm on 2 occasions. Now he had used a knife. He had attacked at night. Now he had struck during daylight. He had left little communication at earlier crime scenes. Now he had written directly on a victim's vehicle. Each new incident demonstrated a willingness to alter tactics while maintaining enough consistency to signal that the crimes were connected. For law enforcement agencies across Northern California, the challenge grew even greater. The offender continued to evade identification despite increasing publicity, expanded investigative resources, and cooperation among multiple jurisdictions. Detectives reviewed reports from military installations, interviewed individuals with knowledge of codes and ciphers, and compared evidence against an expanding list of persons of interest. Yet no definitive suspect emerged. The investigation remained active, but certainty remained elusive. Lake Berryessa had provided investigators with valuable evidence and the testimony of a surviving victim. It also underscored an unsettling reality. The offender's behavior was evolving, and each new attack introduced unexpected elements that forced detectives to reconsider their assumptions. Within weeks, another crime in San Francisco would once again reshape the investigation and bring the case into the center of national attention. This time, the attack would occur not on an isolated country road, but on a city street in broad view of witnesses, generating new evidence and new questions that investigators continue to examine decades later. On the evening of October 11, 1969, San Francisco was settling into another ordinary Saturday night. Traffic flowed through the streets of Presidio Heights. Restaurants remained busy. Families gathered at home, and taxis continued moving passengers across the city as they did every weekend. Among the drivers working that night was Paul Stein, a 29-year-old who had recently moved to San Francisco. Friends described him as intelligent, dependable, and ambitious. Driving a cab was intended to support other career goals, not define the rest of his life. Shortly before 10 p.m., Stein picked up a passenger in downtown San Francisco. Records indicate the fare requested transportation to Presidio Heights neighborhood, one of the city's quieter residential districts. Nothing about the trip appeared unusual. It was another routine fare among many completed that evening. When the taxi stopped near the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets, events unfolded rapidly. Evidence gathered at the scene indicated that the passenger produced a handgun and shot Paul Stein once in the head at close range. The driver died inside the taxi. Unlike previous attacks associated with the Zodiac investigation, this crime occurred in an urban neighborhood rather than an isolated lover's lane or recreational area. Houses overlooked the street. Lights illuminated portions of the intersection. There were potential witnesses nearby. That difference would prove significant. Several teenagers inside a nearby residence looked out their window and observed activity around the taxi. They saw a man leaning into the vehicle and then wiping portions of its interior before walking away. Recognizing that something was seriously wrong, they immediately contacted police. Their observations became one of the most important eyewitness accounts in the investigation. Responding officers received an initial radio dispatch describing the suspect. Due to an error in the information relayed, patrol units were directed to look for an individual whose description did not accurately match the witness's account. Later reviews of the case have noted that this mistake may have affected the initial search, although it is impossible to determine whether a correct description would have resulted in an arrest. One San Francisco police officer later reported encountering a man in the vicinity of the crime scene shortly after the shooting. Because the individual generally matched the incorrect description that had been broadcast, or rather, did not match the description officers believed they were seeking. The encounter did not result in detention. Investigators have long examined the sequence of events, but the historical record does not establish with certainty whether the man seen by the officer was the offender. As detectives secured the crime scene, they discovered evidence that distinguished this homicide from the earlier attacks. The offender had removed a portion of Paul Stine's bloodstained shirt before leaving. At first, investigators could not explain why someone would take such an item. The answer arrived only days later. Another letter reached a San Francisco newspaper. Inside was a piece of the missing shirt. For detectives, this served as compelling confirmation that the letter writer had direct knowledge of the murder and access to physical evidence unavailable to the public. It substantially strengthened the conclusion that the same individual responsible for the earlier correspondence was also responsible for Paul Stine's death. The letter itself continued the pattern established by previous communications. The writer referred to the killing, criticized police efforts, and made additional claims intended to demonstrate control over the public narrative. Investigators treated each statement cautiously, distinguishing between facts that could be independently verified and assertions that could not. The homicide marked an important shift in the overall investigation. The first confirmed attacks had targeted young couples in relatively secluded locations. Paul Stine was alone, performing his job in one of California's largest cities. Whether this reflected a deliberate change in victim selection or simply an opportunistic decision remains unknown. The attack also generated valuable forensic evidence. Crime scene investigators carefully processed a taxi, documenting fingerprints, photographs, fibers, and biological material according to the standards available in 1969. Although forensic science has advanced dramatically in the decades since, investigators preserved much of this evidence, allowing later examinations using techniques unavailable at the time. Among the most discussed items were latent fingerprints recovered from the cab. Over the years, investigators have debated whether all the prints belonged to the offender or whether some resulted from routine contact by passengers, emergency personnel, or others. Because of these uncertainties, the evidentiary value of individual prints has remained the subject of continued examination. The investigation expanded rapidly. Detectives compared handwriting samples from hundreds of individuals. Ballistics experts revisited evidence from previous crime scenes. Witnesses were re-interviewed. Individuals reported suspicious acquaintances, neighbors, and co-workers. Every credible lead required careful evaluation. As public awareness increased, so did the number of potential suspects. Some names appeared repeatedly because of circumstantial similarities. Others emerged after anonymous tips. Still others entered public discussion through books, documentaries, or independent researchers years after crimes occurred. Despite decades of investigation, no suspect has been conclusively identified through evidence meeting the standard required for criminal prosecution. Law enforcement agencies have consistently emphasized this distinction. Numerous individuals have been investigated. Some were eliminated through evidence. Others remain persons of interest for varying periods. None has been officially confirmed as the Zodiac killer. The case also highlighted the challenges of multi-jurisdictional investigations during the late 1960s. Different agencies possessed different pieces of evidence. Records were maintained under varying procedures. Communication, while extensive, lacked many of the digital tools available to investigators today. In later years, efforts were made to consolidate information, digitize records, and re-examine preserved evidence using advances in DNA analysis, fingerprint comparison, and forensic imaging. These developments generated renewed optimism at several points. Each advance offered the possibility that technology might reveal what investigators in 1969 could not. Yet each review also underscored the same reality. Solving a decades-old case depends not only on technology, but also on the quality and condition of the evidence that survives. For the families of the victims, the passage of time brought little closure. The deaths of David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein continue to be remembered not simply because they became part of a famous investigation, but because each represented an individual whose life ended unexpectedly and whose loved ones were left without definitive answers. Today, the Zodiac case remains one of the most extensively studied unsolved investigations in American criminal history. It continues to attract the attention of detectives, historians, forensic specialists, and researchers seeking to separate documented evidence from speculation. The enduring lesson of the case is not merely that an offender avoided identification for decades. It is also a reminder of the importance of preserving evidence, carefully evaluating claims, and distinguishing established facts from theories, an approach that remains essential whenever investigators revisit one of California's most enduring unsolved mysteries. The investigation entered a new phase after the murder of Paul Stein. By late 1969, detectives were no longer responding only to individual crime scenes. They were managing a case that stretched across multiple jurisdictions, generated national headlines, and produced a growing archive of letters, forensic reports, witness interviews, and public tips. Every new development had to be weighed carefully against established evidence, because the volume of information was expanding far faster than the number of confirmed facts. Investigators from Vallejo, Napa County, San Francisco, Solano County, and the California Department of Justice continued exchanging reports. Although cooperation was extensive, each agency retained responsibility for crimes committed within its own jurisdiction. Maintaining consistency across thousands of pages of investigative material proved challenging, particularly at a time when information was stored in paper files rather than searchable digital databases. The correspondence remained central to the investigation. Following the Paul Stein homicide, additional letters attributed to the Zodiac arrived at Bay Area newspapers. Some included details that investigators believed only the offender would likely have known, while others contained claims that could not be independently verified. Detectives therefore adopted a cautious approach, distinguishing between information supported by physical evidence and statements that might represent exaggeration or deliberate misinformation. One recurring feature of the letters was the author's apparent interest in cryptography. The earlier 408-character cipher had already been solved by Donald and Betty Harden. It revealed disturbing statements about the writer's attitudes, but provided no name or location. Later ciphers proved considerably more difficult. In November 1969, another encrypted message, commonly known as a 340-character cipher, was mailed to a newspaper. Unlike the first cipher, this one resisted solution despite decades of effort. Professional cryptographers, intelligence analysts, university researchers, and amateur codebreakers all examined it using increasingly sophisticated methods. For many years, no verified solution emerged. The unresolved cipher became one of the most famous unsolved cryptographic challenges in criminal history. Only in 2020, more than 50 years after it was mailed, was a widely accepted solution produced by an international team consisting of software developer David Oranchak, Australian mathematician Sam Blake, and Belgian programmer Jarl van Eyck. Their work combined computational analysis with traditional code-breaking techniques. Even then, the decoded message did not identify the author. Instead, it largely repeated themes already present in earlier correspondence, including references to media attention and statements about the writer's beliefs. Investigators noted that while the solution represented a significant achievement in cryptanalysis, it did not substantially advance the identification of the offender. Meanwhile, forensic specialists continued examining every available piece of physical evidence. Handwriting experts compared the letters against samples obtained from numerous individuals. Fingerprint examiners revisited latent prints recovered from correspondence and crime scenes. Ballistics analysts compared firearms evidence collected from the shootings. Advances in forensic photography improved documentation of older evidence. Each new scientific development offered hope that previously overlooked details might become significant. The investigation also benefited from improvements in behavioral analysis. Although criminal profiling was still developing during the late 1960s and early 1970s, later analysts examined the case using broader behavioral frameworks. These assessments explored patterns in victim selection, communication, geographic movement, and offender decision-making. Importantly, such profiles were treated as investigative tools rather than proof. They could help generate leads, but could not establish guilt. As public interest intensified, hundreds of names were submitted to investigators. Some individuals resembled composite sketches. Others possessed military backgrounds or technical skills that observers believed were consistent with the ciphers. Still others came to police attention because acquaintances reported unusual behavior. Each credible lead required documentation and evaluation. Among the many persons investigated over the decades, one name became particularly well known: Arthur Lee Allen. Allen first attracted significant investigative attention in the early 1970s. Certain circumstantial factors appeared noteworthy. He reportedly owned a Zodiac brand wristwatch bearing a cross-circle logo similar to the symbol used in the letters. Some acquaintances later reported statements they considered unusual. Investigators also examined aspects of his personal history. However, law enforcement repeatedly emphasized that suspicion alone was insufficient. Search warrants executed at Allen's residence did not produce conclusive evidence linking him to the crimes. Handwriting comparisons failed to establish that he authored the Zodiac letters. Fingerprint evidence did not match him. Later DNA testing likewise did not produce a definitive connection. Although Allen remains one of the best-known suspects in public discussion, authorities have never identified him as a confirmed Zodiac killer, and he was never charged with the murders. Other suspects also emerged over the years. Some were proposed by independent researchers. Others appeared in books, documentaries, or newspaper investigations. In many cases, the supporting evidence consisted primarily of circumstantial observations rather than direct forensic links. Investigators routinely caution against drawing conclusions unsupported by verifiable evidence. The passage of time complicated every aspect of the case. Witness memories naturally faded. Potential suspects died. Documents required preservation. Physical evidence aged despite careful storage. At the same time, forensic science advanced dramatically. DNA profiling, unavailable during the original investigation, transformed criminal investigations worldwide beginning in the late 20th century. Detectives revisited preserved evidence, searching for biological material that might yield a usable genetic profile. The process proved difficult. Many items had been handled before modern contamination protocols existed. Some samples were too limited. Others produced incomplete or inconclusive results. Even so, investigators continued exploring every technological opportunity available. Throughout the decades, law enforcement agencies periodically announced renewed reviews of the case. These updates reflected ongoing commitment rather than confirmation of imminent breakthroughs. Detectives remained careful not to overstate preliminary findings, recognizing the importance of distinguishing investigative possibilities from established conclusions. For historians, the Zodiac investigation represents more than a series of unsolved crimes. It illustrates the evolution of American forensic science. It demonstrates the growing importance of interagency cooperation. It highlights changing approaches to behavioral analysis, evidence preservation, and public communication. The case also influenced media practices. News organizations increasingly recognize the ethical challenges associated with publishing communications from violent offenders. Editors faced difficult decisions about balancing public interest against the possibility of amplifying an offender's message. For the victims' families, however, the central question never changed. Who was responsible? Despite decades of investigative effort, no court has answered that question. No jury has heard the evidence. No conviction has been obtained. The victims remain at the heart of the case: David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard Paul Stein, and survivor Brian Hartnell, whose testimony continues to provide an invaluable account of one of the attacks. More than half a century later, investigators continue to preserve evidence, review new information, and evaluate credible leads. Advances in forensic technology may yet contribute additional insights. Whether those advances will ultimately identify the offender remains uncertain. What is certain is that the Zodiac investigation endures as one of the most thoroughly examined unsolved homicide cases in American history, one defined not only by its mysteries, but also by the persistence of the investigators who have continued searching for answers across generations. The decades that followed transformed the Zodiac investigation from an active series of homicide inquiries into one of the longest-running cold cases in American law enforcement. A cold case does not mean a forgotten case. Rather, it describes an investigation in which all immediately available leads have been exhausted, while evidence is preserved in the hope that future witnesses, technologies, or discoveries may provide new answers. The Zodiac files remained active in that sense for generations, periodically returning to investigators' desks whenever a promising lead emerged. Preserving evidence became a priority. Boxes containing reports, photographs, fingerprints, ballistic examinations, handwritten letters, and physical exhibits were carefully retained. Detectives understood that forensic science was advancing rapidly. Methods unavailable in 1969 might one day reveal information hidden within evidence that had already been collected. That expectation proved well-founded. During the late 20th century and into the 21st, DNA analysis fundamentally changed criminal investigations around the world. Cases that had remained unsolved for decades were suddenly reopened because biological evidence could now be examined with far greater sensitivity than previously possible. The Zodiac investigation benefited from these advances, although not as dramatically as many had hoped. Investigators revisited envelopes, stamps, and other correspondence attributed to the Zodiac. The goal was straightforward: determine whether sufficient biological material remained to produce a usable DNA profile. Such work presented significant challenges. Many of the letters have been handled repeatedly before modern evidence preservation standards existed. Some biological traces may have belonged to postal workers, investigators, or newspaper employees rather than the sender. In other instances, the available material was simply too limited to produce definitive results. As forensic methods improved further, agencies periodically announced that evidence would be re-examined using updated techniques. These announcements often generated public optimism, but investigators consistently cautioned that retesting evidence does not guarantee identification. Even a partial DNA profile must be interpreted carefully and compared against appropriate reference samples before meaningful conclusions can be reached. The public's fascination with the case never disappeared. Books examined the investigation from different perspectives. Television documentaries reconstructed the known timeline. Podcasts interviewed retired detectives, journalists, forensic specialists, and historians. Feature films introduce a story to new audiences, often emphasizing the painstaking work of investigators rather than offering definitive conclusions. Each new production also reminded viewers of an important distinction. Dramatic interpretation is not the same as historical fact. Researchers outside law enforcement likewise devoted years to studying the case. Some focus on geographic analysis, mapping crime scenes, phone calls, and letter mailings in an effort to estimate areas familiar to the offender. Others analyze the language used in the correspondence, looking for recurrent expressions or writing habits that might suggest educational background, occupation, or regional influences. These studies occasionally generated intriguing hypotheses. None by themselves identified the offender with certainty. Another recurring topic involved the authenticity of individual letters. Not every communication claiming to come from the Zodiac has been accepted as genuine. Over the years, investigators examined numerous letters, greeting cards, and anonymous messages. Some were considered likely authentic because they contained information not publicly available or included verified physical evidence, such as a portion of Paul Stein's shirt. Others lacked comparable support and remain disputed. This distinction matters. When historians reconstruct the case today, They rely primarily on communications that investigators have regarded as credible. Separating authenticated evidence from uncertain material helps prevent speculation from becoming accepted history. Technology also changed the way information could be analyzed. Digital databases allowed investigators to compare fingerprints more efficiently. Archive reports could be searched electronically rather than page by page. High-resolution imaging enhanced the examination of handwriting and physical documents. Although these developments streamlined investigative work, they did not eliminate the central challenge. The available evidence still had to point convincingly toward a single individual. Throughout the years, law enforcement agencies repeatedly emphasized that no suspect had been conclusively identified. Many names have entered public discussion. Some individuals were investigated extensively. Others became associated with the case through books or independent research. The existence of a suspect, however, is not equivalent to proof. Criminal investigations require evidence that can withstand careful scrutiny, and in the Zodiac case, that threshold has not been met. The investigation also left a lasting impact on policing itself. Communication between agencies gradually improved through shared databases and standardized reporting procedures. Evidence preservation became more rigorous. Cold case units expanded in many jurisdictions, recognizing that advances in forensic science could provide opportunities unavailable to earlier investigators. The Zodiac case became one example frequently referenced in discussions about the importance of maintaining evidence for future examination. For surviving family members of the victims, the passage of time carried a different meaning. Anniversaries continued to arrive. Birthdays passed. New generations grew up knowing relatives they had never met except through photographs and family stories. For them, the case has never been defined by newspaper headlines or famous ciphers. It has always been about lives interrupted and questions that remain unanswered. Brian Hartnell, the sole survivor of the Lake Berryessa attack, has on several occasions reflected publicly on his experience. His willingness to recount what happened had provided investigators and historians with valuable first-hand information, while also reminding audiences that the crimes affected real people whose experiences extended far beyond the historical record. Today, more than half a century after the first confirmed attack, the Zodiac investigation continues to occupy a unique place in American criminal history. It is remembered not because every question has been answered, but because so many remain unresolved. Who wrote every authentic letter? Did a single individual commit all of the confirmed attacks? Was crucial evidence overlooked, or has it simply never existed? Could future forensic advances reveal information hidden within preserved evidence? Investigators cannot answer those questions with certainty. What they can say is that the case has never been closed in the sense of being solved. Evidence remains preserved. Credible leads continue to be evaluated when they emerge. Modern forensic science continues to evolve, and with every significant advance comes a possibility, however uncertain, that one of America's most enduring mysteries may someday move closer to resolution. Until that day, the Zodiac investigation stands as a reminder that not every criminal case ends with an arrest, but every careful investigation contributes to a larger pursuit of truth, guided by evidence rather than assumption, and by the enduring commitment to seek justice for victims whose stories deserve to be remembered. The enduring public interest in the Zodiac investigation has often created the impression that every aspect of the case remains shrouded in mystery. In reality, investigators distinguish carefully between what is established by evidence, what is strongly supported by documentation, and what remains speculative. That distinction has become increasingly important as the case has entered popular culture, where dramatic retellings sometimes blur the line between historical fact and fictional interpretation. Among the best documented aspects of the investigation are the confirmed attacks, the authenticated correspondence, and extensive efforts made by multiple law enforcement agencies to identify the offender. Thousands of pages of reports, witness interviews, crime scene photographs, forensic examinations, and laboratory analyses have been preserved. Together, they provide one of the most comprehensive records ever assembled for an unsolved homicide investigation in the United States. One recurring challenge involved eyewitness testimony. Witnesses observed different portions of different incidents under varying conditions. Some encountered events at night. Others viewed a suspect only briefly or from a distance. Human memory, while invaluable, is not a perfect recording device. Investigators therefore compared witness accounts with physical evidence whenever possible rather than relying on any single description alone. The same careful approach applied to the handwritten letters. Forensic document examiners studied writing style, letter formation, spacing, punctuation, and pen pressure. Their analyses helped determine whether certain communications were likely written by the same individual. However, handwriting comparison has limitations. A person may intentionally disguise writing, and similarities alone cannot conclusively establish identity. Consequently, handwriting evidence has generally been considered alongside other investigative findings rather than as independent proof. Ballistics examinations also played an important role. Recovered bullets and cartridge casings were compared using the microscopic markings left by firearm components. These comparisons allowed examiners to assess whether the same weapon had likely been used in multiple incidents. Such work helped investigators connect events, even though the firearm itself was never recovered. As forensic science advanced, investigators revisited older evidence with modern technology. High-resolution digital imaging allowed specialists to examine photographs and documents in greater detail than had been possible decades earlier. Fingerprint comparison systems became computerized, enabling much larger databases to be searched efficiently. DNA testing techniques improved dramatically, increasing the possibility that extremely small biological samples might yield useful information. Even so, investigators consistently caution against unrealistic expectations. Television dramas often portray forensic science as producing immediate and definitive answers. Real investigations are far more complex. Evidence may be degraded, contaminated, incomplete, or entirely absent. Scientific advances improve the chances of discovering new information, but they cannot create evidence that never existed. The case has also become a valuable educational resource for investigators and forensic scientists. Police academies and criminal justice programs have examined aspects of the investigation when discussing crime scene preservation, interagency cooperation, media relations, and cold case methodology. The Zodiac investigation illustrates how a major case evolves over time, requiring successive generations of detectives to review earlier work while applying new techniques and technologies. Media coverage has changed significantly since 1969. During the original investigation, newspapers, radio broadcasts, and television news served as the primary means of informing the public. Today, digital archives allow researchers to examine original articles alongside official documents and court records. This broader access has encouraged more careful historical analysis, while also making it easier to compare contemporary reporting with later investigative findings. Independent researchers have contributed in various ways. Some have organized historical timelines using publicly available records. Others have located previously overlooked newspaper articles or interviewed retired investigators willing to discuss their experiences. In certain instances, such research has clarified the chronology of events or corrected inaccuracies that had circulated for years. Law enforcement agencies nevertheless emphasize that independent research does not replace official investigation. Every proposed suspect, theory, or interpretation must ultimately be measured against verifiable evidence. The passage of time has inevitably affected the investigation. Many original detectives have retired or passed away. Some witnesses are no longer living. Physical locations associated with the crimes have changed through development and urban expansion, yet the documentary record remains. Photographs preserve crime scenes. Reports preserve investigative decisions. Laboratory records preserve forensic findings. These materials allow modern investigators to revisit earlier conclusions with fresh perspectives while maintaining continuity with the original inquiry. For the families of those affected, the investigation has always represented something more personal than a famous unsolved mystery. Every official announcement has carried the possibility of long-awaited answers. Every renewed forensic examination has offered cautious hope. Every credible lead has raised a question of whether decades of uncertainty might finally come to an end. Although that resolution has not yet been achieved, the commitment to preserving evidence and reviewing new information continues. The Zodiac investigation therefore occupies a distinctive place in criminal history, not simply because it remains unsolved, but because it demonstrates a persistence required in long-term investigations. Detectives separated by generations have contributed to the same case file, each building upon the work of those who came before. Whether future advances in forensic science will ultimately identify the offender cannot be predicted. What can be stated with confidence is that the investigation established important lessons that continue to influence modern policing. Preserve evidence carefully, document every finding thoroughly, distinguish verified facts from speculation, and remain open to the possibility that tomorrow's technology may answer questions that today's methods cannot. Those principles extend far beyond a single investigation. They represent the foundation of every cold case inquiry, reminding investigators that while time may complicate the search for truth, it does not end the obligation to pursue it with patience, accuracy, and respect for the victims whose stories remain at the heart of the case. The Zodiac investigation also illustrates how cold cases evolve as society's expectations of forensic science change. In the decades immediately following the murders, many members of the public believed that a single overlooked clue would eventually expose the offender. As scientific techniques advanced, that expectation shifted toward DNA analysis, computerized fingerprint databases, and digital reconstruction. Investigators welcomed these developments, but repeatedly emphasized that technology is only as effective as the evidence available for examination. One of the greatest strengths of the original investigation was the careful preservation of physical evidence. Crime scene photographs, handwritten correspondence, fingerprint lifts, ballistic evidence, witness statements, and laboratory reports were retained for future review. Although investigators in 1969 could not have anticipated many of today's forensic techniques, preserving those materials ensured that later generations would have the opportunity to examine them with more advanced methods. This long-term approach has become a defining characteristic of modern cold case investigations. Rather than assuming an unsolved case has reached its conclusion, agencies increasingly recognize that preserved evidence may gain new value as scientific capabilities improve. In many jurisdictions, specialized cold case units periodically re-examine older investigations, reviewing files that may not have been revisited for years. The Zodiac case has benefited from this philosophy. Evidence has been reanalyzed on multiple occasions using updated forensic procedures. Investigators have continued evaluating latent fingerprints, handwriting, biological material, and other physical exhibits whenever improvements in laboratory methods justified renewed examination. While these efforts have not produced a definitive identification, they demonstrate the continuing commitment to resolving the case through evidence rather than speculation. Public interest has remained unusually strong across generations. Unlike many criminal investigations that gradually fade from public attention, the Zodiac case continues to attract historians, journalists, criminologists, and forensic specialists. Universities have examined aspects of the investigation in criminal justice courses. Museums and historical archives have preserved contemporary newspaper coverage. Researchers have documented the chronology of events with increasing precision, comparing official records against media reporting from the period. This sustained attention has produced both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, renewed public interest occasionally encourages witnesses or individuals with relevant information to come forward. Historical records may also surface through private collections or newly digitized archives. On the other hand, widespread attention inevitably generates unsupported theories, mistaken identifications, and misinformation. Investigators therefore continue to evaluate new claims according to the same evidentiary standards applied throughout the original investigation. The distinction between evidence and theory remains essential. Many books and documentaries have proposed specific suspects, often presenting circumstantial similarities that appear compelling at first glance. Responsible investigators, however, distinguish between observations that invite further inquiry and evidence capable of establishing criminal responsibility. Similar handwriting, geographic proximity, or personal interests may justify additional investigation, but they do not independently prove guilt. This careful methodology reflects one of the central principles of criminal investigation. Conclusions must follow the evidence, not precede it. The Zodiac investigation also influenced discussions about communication between law enforcement and the media. The letters demonstrated how anonymous correspondence could shape public perception of an investigation. Since then, many agencies have developed more structured approaches to releasing investigative information, balancing transparency with the need to protect evidence known only to investigators. Preserving certain details can help authenticate future confessions, identify false claims, and strengthen the reliability of witness statements. For forensic historians, the case serves as a valuable record of investigative practice during a period of significant transition. The late 1960s and early 1970s marked an era in which traditional detective work increasingly intersected with emerging scientific methods. Ballistics, document examination, fingerprint analysis, and crime scene photography all played important roles, even though many technologies familiar today had not yet been developed. Looking back, it is clear that investigators pursued thousands of leads with the resources available to them. Some avenues ultimately proved unproductive. Others eliminated individuals who had initially appeared promising. Such outcomes are a normal part of major investigations, where the process of excluding possibilities is often as important as identifying new ones. The enduring significance of the Zodiac investigation therefore extends beyond the identity of the offender. It has contributed to improvements in evidence preservation. It has highlighted the importance of cooperation between multiple investigative agencies. It has demonstrated the value of maintaining comprehensive case files for future review. Most importantly, it has reinforced a principle shared by investigators worldwide. Every victim deserves a thorough investigation, regardless of how much time has passed. Today, the case remains officially unsolved. Evidence continues to be preserved. Credible information continues to be evaluated. Advances in forensic science continue to offer new possibilities, even if no guarantee of resolution exists. Whether the identity of the Zodiac killer will ever be established with a certainty required by modern investigative standards remains unknown. What is known is that the search for answers has spanned more than half a century, involving generations of detectives, forensic scientists, and researchers committed to examining the evidence with care, discipline, and respect for the historical record. In that sense, the legacy of the investigation is measured not only by the mystery it left behind, but also by the enduring commitment to seek the truth through patient, methodical inquiry, an approach that continues to guide cold case investigations around the world today. The story of the Zodiac investigation remains unfinished not because investigators stopped searching, but because the available evidence has yet to produce a conclusion that meets the standards required in a criminal investigation. That distinction is important. An unsolved case is not necessarily an abandoned case. Evidence can be revisited, new witnesses can emerge, and scientific advances can provide opportunities that did not exist when the crimes were first investigated. In recent decades, law enforcement agencies have periodically confirmed that the case remains under review. Physical evidence has been re-examined as laboratory techniques have improved, and investigators have continued to assess credible information submitted by members of the public. These efforts are typical of major cold case investigations, where preserving evidence for future analysis is considered just as important as the original investigative work. The development of forensic genealogy in the 21st century has naturally led to questions about whether similar methods could resolve the Zodiac case. Genealogical DNA analysis has helped identify suspects in several long unsolved investigations by comparing crime scene DNA with publicly available family tree databases, subject to legal and procedural requirements. However, the success of that approach depends on obtaining a reliable DNA profile from the offender. Investigators have not publicly announced that such a profile exists in the Zodiac investigation, and without one, genealogical analysis cannot provide a definitive answer. This reality illustrates a broader principle in forensic science. Technology does not replace evidence. Instead, it enhances the ability to interpret evidence that has already been preserved. Where biological material is incomplete, contaminated, or absent, even the most advanced laboratory techniques have significant limitations. Investigators therefore continue to balance optimism about scientific progress with realistic assessments of what the available evidence can support. The case has also become an important subject within the study of criminal investigations. Students of forensic science frequently examine how evidence was collected, documented, and preserved across multiple jurisdictions. Historians analyze how investigative methods evolved during the late 20th century. Media scholars study the relationship between public communication and criminal investigations, particularly the challenges posed by anonymous letters and widespread publicity. These perspectives demonstrate that the Zodiac investigation has significance beyond the question of identity alone. It serves as a historical record of investigative practice. It illustrates the importance of maintaining detailed documentation over many decades. It reminds investigators that major cases often require cooperation across multiple agencies with different responsibilities and resources. Perhaps most importantly, it reinforces the principle that every investigative conclusion should rest upon verifiable evidence rather than assumption. Public discussion has inevitably produced numerous theories. Some focus on particular suspects. Others propose alternative interpretations of the correspondence or the sequence of events. While such discussions contribute to ongoing public interest, investigators consistently distinguish between hypothesis and evidence. A theory may explain certain aspects of a case, but only evidence capable of independent verification can establish responsibility. For this reason, official statements have remained measured. Rather than declaring certainty where none exists, agencies have generally acknowledged both the strengths and the limitations of the available evidence. This approach reflects the standards expected in modern criminal investigations, where the accuracy of conclusions is considered more important than the speed with which they are reached. The victims remain the central focus of that work. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein each had families, friends, ambitions, and futures that were abruptly interrupted. Brian Hartnell, who survived the attack at Lake Berryessa, provided investigators with testimony that remains one of the most important first-hand accounts in the case. Their experiences continue to define the investigation far more than the anonymous individual responsible for crimes. As the years pass, preserving historical accuracy becomes increasingly important. Original investigative files, laboratory reports, photographs, and authenticated correspondence allow researchers to distinguish documented facts from later speculation. They also ensure that future investigators can evaluate the evidence without relying solely on secondary accounts or popular retellings. Whether the Zodiac case will ultimately be solved cannot be predicted. History has shown that cold cases can be resolved unexpectedly through a combination of preserved evidence, scientific innovation, and persistent investigative work. It has also shown that some investigations remain unresolved despite extraordinary effort. Both outcomes are part of the reality of criminal justice. The lasting legacy of the Zodiac investigation, therefore, lies not only in its unanswered questions, but in the lessons it has provided. It demonstrates the value of careful evidence preservation, interdisciplinary cooperation, rigorous forensic standards, and a continued commitment to pursuing the truth, even when that pursuit extends across generations. For investigators, the case remains a reminder that every piece of evidence deserves careful consideration. For historians, it remains a window into an important period in the evolution of modern policing. And for the families of the victims, it remains an enduring hope that one day the historical record may finally include the answer they have sought for more than half a century. The passage of time has changed many things about the Zodiac investigation, but it has not changed the fundamental responsibility at its center, the pursuit of answers for the victims and their families. More than 5 decades after first confirmed crimes, the case remains a reminder that investigations do not always follow a predictable timeline. Some are solved quickly through eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, or confession. Others become long journeys requiring patience, preservation, and the willingness to revisit old questions with new methods. The Zodiac case belongs to the second category. When the original investigators began their work in the late 1960s, they were operating in a very different forensic environment. There were no national DNA databases. There were no automated fingerprint identification systems capable of instantly comparing millions of records. There were no digital archives allowing investigators to search decades of documents within seconds. Detectives relied on interviews, handwritten notes, physical evidence, laboratory testing available at the time, and the cooperation of agencies separated by geography and jurisdiction. Despite these limitations, investigators built an extensive record. Every statement was documented. Every piece of physical evidence was cataloged. Every potential lead was examined. The volume of information reflected the seriousness of the investigation and the determination of those assigned to the case. Modern investigators who later reviewed the files often noted the enormous amount of work conducted by earlier detectives. The absence of an arrest did not mean that investigators failed to pursue the case. Rather, it reflected the difficulty of connecting an unknown individual to crimes committed in different locations while leaving behind limited identifying evidence. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation was the offender's ability to create uncertainty. The letters generated information, but they also created additional questions. Some statements could be verified, others could not. Some claims appear designed to demonstrate knowledge of the crimes. Others may have been intended to confuse investigators. Determining the difference required careful analysis. This challenge continues today. Researchers examining the case must constantly separate confirmed historical facts from assumptions that have developed over decades of public discussion. For example, the number of crimes associated with the Zodiac investigation has often been debated. Law enforcement agencies have generally focused on confirmed attacks supported by evidence, while additional incidents have occasionally been suggested by researchers. Without sufficient proof, those possible connections remain unconfirmed. This distinction reflects a broader principle in criminal investigation. Association is not the same as proof. A case can contain many unanswered questions while still having a clearly established factual foundation. The confirmed timeline provides that foundation. The December 1968 attack near Lake Herman Road. The July 1969 shooting at Blue Rock Springs. The September 1969 attack at Lake Berryessa. The October 1969 killing of Paul Stein in San Francisco. The letters and ciphers connected to the investigation. The years of investigative work that followed. These events form the documented core of the case. Everything beyond that requires careful evaluation. The investigation also demonstrated the complicated relationship between law enforcement and public attention. In some cases, publicity can help investigators by encouraging witnesses to provide information. In others, excessive attention can produce thousands of false leads and create pressure that complicates decision-making. The Zodiac case experienced both effects. Members of the public submitted information that investigators considered valuable. Others reported suspicions based only on rumors or personal disagreements. Detectives had to evaluate each piece of information objectively, regardless of how convincing it initially appeared. This remains one of the most difficult tasks in any major investigation, determining which information deserves attention and which information creates distraction. The same challenge applies to modern online discussions. The Internet has allowed researchers around the world to access historical documents, compare theories, and discuss evidence. This has increased public participation in examining cold cases. However, it has also made it easier for unsupported claims to spread rapidly. Professional investigators continue to rely on a different standard. Evidence must be documented. Sources must be verified. Conclusions must be supported. This approach may appear slower, but it protects against wrongful accusations and ensures that any future legal action is based on reliable information. The possibility of wrongful identification is particularly significant in a case that has received decades of attention. Naming an individual without sufficient evidence can permanently damage reputations and distract from legitimate investigative efforts. For this reason, responsible examination of the Zodiac case requires acknowledging uncertainty. Many questions remain unanswered. Some evidence may never provide a complete explanation. Some investigative paths may remain unresolved forever. Yet uncertainty does not eliminate the value of continued examination. Every cold case carries a possibility of discovery. A new witness may remember a detail previously forgotten. A preserved document may reveal information overlooked. A scientific advancement may unlock evidence once considered unusable. A connection between previously unrelated records may emerge. These possibilities are why agencies continue preserving and reviewing older cases. The Zodiac investigation also represents a broader human search for closure. For families affected by unsolved crimes, the passage of time does not erase the need for answers. Decades may pass, but unanswered questions remain part of their lives. The work of investigators, therefore, is not simply about solving historical puzzles. It is about recognizing the continuing impact of crime on real people. Every report, every piece of evidence, and every renewed examination represents an effort to address that impact. The Zodiac case remains open in the historical sense because the central question remains unresolved. Who was responsible? The answer has not been established through evidence accepted by the justice system. But the investigation itself continues to offer important lessons. It demonstrates the necessity of patience. It shows the importance of scientific progress. It highlights the value of preserving evidence beyond the immediate needs of an investigation. And it reinforces a principle that extends far beyond one famous case. The passage of time may make justice more difficult, but it does not make the search for truth less important. As the investigation moved further into the 21st century, the Zodiac case entered a new era, one defined less by immediate pursuit and more by historical review, scientific evaluation, and careful preservation of evidence. The urgency of the original investigation had transformed into a long-term effort shared by different generations of investigators, each inheriting a case file created decades before. The nature of cold case work is fundamentally different from an active investigation. When a crime first occurs, detectives often rely on fresh memories, immediate witness interviews, and evidence collected directly from a recent scene. With time, those advantages disappear. Witnesses may forget details or pass away. Physical locations may change. Records may become harder to locate. Investigators must reconstruct events from materials preserved by those who worked the case years earlier. In the Zodiac investigation, reconstruction has been essential. Researchers and law enforcement officials have repeatedly returned to the original timeline, examining what was known at each stage and what conclusions were justified based on the evidence available at that moment. This process helps prevent hindsight from influencing historical analysis. A major investigation is not judged only by its final outcome. It is also measured by the quality of the work performed, the accuracy of documentation, and the methods used to evaluate information. The Zodiac files demonstrate how investigative standards have evolved. Evidence collection procedures that were considered acceptable in the 1960s have since been refined. Modern crime scenes are processed with stricter contamination controls, more advanced photography, and increasingly sophisticated laboratory protocols. These changes have influenced how investigators approach older cases. Rather than simply searching for one dramatic breakthrough, modern cold case teams often conduct systematic reviews. They examine whether previously collected evidence can answer new questions. They compare old findings against updated scientific standards. They look for connections that may have been impossible to recognize decades earlier. This methodical approach has become common across major unsolved investigations. The Zodiac case also highlights the importance of preserving original records. Without the work of earlier investigators who maintained files, photographs, and physical evidence, later generations would have far fewer opportunities to examine the case. Preservation allows future technology to build upon past efforts rather than forcing investigators to begin again. The importance of documentation extends beyond law enforcement. Historians studying criminal justice rely on accurate records to understand how investigations developed over time. They examine not only the crimes themselves, but also the response of police departments, forensic laboratories, journalists, and communities affected by fear and uncertainty. From this perspective, the Zodiac investigation provides insight into a changing era of American policing. The late 1960s marked a period when scientific methods were becoming increasingly important in criminal investigations. Traditional detective work remained essential, but agencies were beginning to expand their use of laboratory analysis, standardized evidence procedures, and specialized expertise. The case also reflected challenges that remain relevant today. How much information should investigators release to the public? How should authorities respond to anonymous communications? How can agencies cooperate effectively when crimes cross multiple jurisdictions? How can investigators encourage public assistance while avoiding unnecessary speculation? These questions continue to shape modern investigative practices. Another important aspect of the case is the role of survivors and witnesses. In many investigations, eyewitness accounts provide the foundation for understanding what happened. However, investigators must also recognize the complexity of memory. Stress, distance, lighting conditions, and the passage of time can all influence recollections. For this reason, professional investigators compare witness statements with physical evidence whenever possible. The strongest conclusions usually emerge when multiple forms of evidence support the same explanation. This principle has guided the examination of the Zodiac case for decades. No single piece of evidence has provided a complete solution. Instead, investigators have worked with a collection of partial information, documented crime scenes, correspondence, forensic findings, and witness accounts. The challenge has always been determining how those pieces fit together. The continuing public interest in the case has also created opportunities for education. Many people who encounter the story today are introduced to concepts such as cryptography, forensic document examination, fingerprint analysis, and cold case methodology through discussions of the investigation. While the crimes themselves represent tragedy, the investigative response has contributed to broader understanding of how criminal cases are studied and resolved. At the same time, experts continue to emphasize the importance of remembering the human impact behind the evidence. Case files contain names, dates, photographs, and reports. But behind every document are people whose lives were permanently changed. The victims were not simply parts of an investigation. They were family members, friends, students, workers, and individuals with personal histories that existed long before their names appeared in police reports. Maintaining that perspective is essential when examining any historical crime. The search for answers is ultimately about more than solving a mystery. It is about acknowledging those affected and ensuring that investigations remain focused on justice rather than fascination alone. Today, the Zodiac case remains one of the most studied unsolved investigations in the United States. Its unresolved status continues to attract attention, but its deeper significance lies in what it reveals about the nature of investigative work itself. Some cases are solved within days. Some require years. Some continue across generations. The Zodiac investigation belongs to the final category. It remains a reminder that evidence can survive beyond the limitations of its era, that scientific progress can reopen questions once considered impossible, and that the pursuit of truth often depends on persistence rather than immediate success. The case remains unresolved, but the investigation continues to represent an enduring commitment to examine the facts carefully, preserve what remains, and continue searching for answers on behalf of those whose lives were forever changed. The continuing examination of the Zodiac investigation has also shown how the meaning of a cold case changes over time. In the beginning, the priority was immediate identification and apprehension. Detectives needed to determine who was responsible, prevent further harm, and collect evidence strong enough to support prosecution. Decades later, the focus expanded. Investigators, historians, and forensic specialists began examining not only who might have been responsible, but also how the investigation itself evolved and what lessons could be applied to future cases. One of the most significant developments in modern criminal investigation has been the increased importance of interdisciplinary cooperation. A complex case rarely depends on a single area of expertise. Detectives may need assistance from forensic scientists, document analysts, historians, computer specialists, behavioral experts, and legal professionals. Each discipline contributes a different perspective, helping investigators build a more complete understanding of the available evidence. The Zodiac investigation represents an early example of this challenge. The case involved multiple crime scenes, different jurisdictions, extensive written communication, and evidence collected during a period when forensic technology was far more limited than it is today. Solving such a case required coordination among agencies that did not always share the same resources or procedures. Over time, law enforcement agencies developed more advanced systems for cooperation, shared databases, improved communication networks, and specialized investigative teams became common tools in major investigations. These changes were influenced by lessons learned from many high-profile cases, including those that remained unresolved. Another important development has been the growth of forensic document analysis. The Zodiac correspondence remains one of the most studied collections of criminal communications in modern history. Specialists have examined handwriting characteristics, language patterns, paper types, envelopes, postage materials, and other details that might provide investigative value. However, experts continue to emphasize caution. A person's writing style can reveal patterns, but it rarely provides absolute identification by itself. Handwriting can change naturally over time. People can intentionally alter their writing. Similarities between documents must be evaluated alongside other evidence. The same principle applies to linguistic analysis. Researchers have studied vocabulary, sentence structure, spelling habits, and repeated expressions in the letters. Such analysis can sometimes provide clues about education, regional background, or writing habits. Yet language alone cannot establish identity with certainty. The investigation has also highlighted the changing role of technology in criminal justice. In 1969, investigators worked with physical files and limited laboratory resources. Today, detectives can use digital databases, advanced imaging, computer-assisted comparisons, and sophisticated analytical tools. These technologies have transformed how evidence is stored, searched, and interpreted. But despite these advances, the fundamental process remains unchanged. Investigators must still ask the same essential questions. What does the evidence prove? What does it suggest? What remains unknown? This careful separation between fact and possibility is one of the most important elements of professional investigation. Over the years, numerous individuals have been publicly connected to the Zodiac case. Some names gained attention because of circumstantial similarities. Others became subjects of independent research. A few were examined seriously by investigators. Yet, public attention and investigative certainty are not the same thing. A person may become widely discussed while still lacking evidence sufficient for prosecution. Responsible examination of historical cases requires acknowledging this difference. The danger of unsupported accusations is especially significant in famous unsolved cases. Once a name becomes associated with a crime, that association can persist regardless of whether evidence supports it. Modern investigators and researchers therefore emphasize careful language, accurate sourcing, and respect for the rights of individuals who have never been convicted. This approach reflects one of the most important principles of justice. Suspicion is not proof. The Zodiac investigation also demonstrates the importance of reviewing past conclusions without unfairly judging earlier investigators by modern standards. Detectives working in 1969 did not have access to today's technology. They made decisions based on the information and resources available at the time. Modern reviews of historical cases are most valuable when they seek understanding rather than criticism, examining what was known, what was possible, and what limitations investigators faced. This perspective helps explain why some mysteries remain unresolved despite enormous effort. A case may contain extensive information, yet still lack the specific evidence required to identify a suspect conclusively. Investigators may know many details about what happened while still being unable to prove who was responsible. That gap between knowledge and certainty is one of the defining challenges of cold case investigations. For the communities affected by the Zodiac crimes, the passage of time has created a complicated legacy. The locations connected to the case have changed. Generations have grown up with no personal memory of the events. Yet the impact remains present through families, historical records, and ongoing efforts to preserve the victims' stories. Remembering the victims remains central to understanding the case. Behind every investigation file are individuals whose lives had meaning beyond the circumstances of their deaths. Their families experienced loss that continued long after headlines disappeared. Any serious examination of the case must recognize a human reality. The future of the investigation remains uncertain. New technology may provide opportunities that cannot currently be predicted. Additional historical discoveries may clarify unanswered questions. Future researchers may uncover information that changes how parts of the case are understood. At the same time, investigators recognize that some mysteries may never be fully resolved. The responsibility, however, remains the same. Preserve the evidence. Evaluate new information carefully. Follow verified facts. Maintain respect for those affected. The Zodiac investigation endures because it represents both the challenges and the possibilities of criminal justice. It shows that even decades later, careful investigation can continue. Scientific progress can create new opportunities, and the search for truth can remain active long after the original events have passed. The unanswered questions surrounding the case have lasted for generations, but so has the determination to examine them. In that continuing effort lies the most important part of any cold case investigation. Not the mystery itself, but commitment to finding the truth. The legacy of the Zodiac investigation extends well beyond the case itself. Over the decades, it has become a reference point in discussions about forensic science, investigative methodology, and the challenges of resolving crimes long after they occur. For students of criminal justice, the case demonstrates that an investigation is not defined solely by whether it ends in an arrest. It is also defined by the integrity of the process, the preservation of evidence, and the willingness to revisit difficult questions as new tools become available. One of the clearest lessons involves evidence preservation. When detectives process the original crime scenes, they could not have anticipated the scientific capabilities that would exist decades later. Even so, the careful collection and storage of physical evidence allowed future investigators to conduct additional examinations using technologies that had not yet been invented. This principle has influenced investigative practice worldwide. Today, law enforcement agencies routinely preserve evidence for extended periods, recognizing that future advances may provide opportunities unavailable during the initial investigation. Cold case units often begin their work not by searching for entirely new evidence, but by asking whether existing evidence can now answer questions that once seemed impossible to resolve. The Zodiac investigation has also encouraged discussion about interagency cooperation. Because the crimes occurred in multiple jurisdictions, no single department possessed every piece of information. Effective communication between agencies became essential. Modern investigative systems have expanded considerably since then, allowing departments to share records, laboratory results, and investigative leads more efficiently than was possible in the late 1960s. Another enduring lesson concerns public communication. The investigation unfolded during an era in which newspapers and television served as the primary channels of information. Today, digital media allows information to circulate almost instantly. While rapid communication can encourage witnesses to come forward, it can also spread speculation and misinformation. Investigators, therefore, continue to balance transparency with a need to protect sensitive details that may be important for verifying future evidence or evaluating claims. This balance is particularly important in high-profile cold cases. Over the years, numerous individuals have claimed to possess new information about the Zodiac investigation. Some tips have been carefully evaluated and documented. Others have been determined to lack supporting evidence. Every credible lead requires time, resources, and careful analysis, illustrating why experienced investigators emphasize patience over speed. The case has likewise contributed to public understanding of forensic limitations. Popular culture sometimes creates the impression that every crime can be solved through a single fingerprint, a DNA sample, or a dramatic laboratory breakthrough. Real investigations are rarely so straightforward. Scientific techniques are powerful, but they depend on the quality and availability of evidence. Where evidence is incomplete or degraded, investigators must work within those constraints. This reality has become an important educational point for forensic science programs. Students examining the Zodiac investigation learn that successful criminal investigations depend upon a combination of scientific analysis, careful documentation, witness interviews, historical research, and critical thinking. No single discipline provides every answer. Instead, each contributes part of a larger picture. The victims' families have remained an important reminder of why these efforts continue. For them, the investigation has never been an academic exercise or a famous historical mystery. It has represented decades of unanswered questions and the enduring hope that the evidence might someday provide greater clarity. Maintaining that perspective helps ensure that discussions of the case remain centered on those who were harmed rather than on the notoriety of the offender. Looking ahead, the future of the investigation will likely continue to depend on the same principles that have guided it for decades. Preserve evidence, evaluate new information objectively, distinguish established facts from speculation, and apply emerging scientific methods whenever appropriate. Whether those efforts ultimately identify the offender cannot be predicted. What can be said with confidence is that the Zodiac investigation has left a lasting influence on criminal justice. It has informed discussions about cold case investigations, encouraged improvements in forensic practice, and highlighted the importance of maintaining meticulous records that future generations can examine with fresh perspectives. In that respect, the case represents more than an unsolved series of crimes. It illustrates the ongoing evolution of investigative science and the enduring commitment of law enforcement to pursue answers responsibly, even when the search extends across generations. The mystery remains unresolved, but the principles refined through its investigation continue to shape how modern investigators approach some of the most challenging cases they encounter.